In a world of uncertainty, it can be tempting to wish for definitive answers. The one right way to practice yoga. Is it yin? Is it ashtanga? The one right diet to follow. Vegan, paleo, or even the one right way to live. Should we ignore what other people think? Or should we be considerate of others? I'm Matthew Hui, co-author of The Physiology of Yoga, along with Andrew McGonigle. In this book, we take an evidence-based look at how yoga affects the many different systems of our body. And this video on critical thinking summarizes some of the main points in the introduction to our book. Today, literally anyone can publish anything online. So it is very easy to find contradictory information. For example, you should never engage your glutes in a back bend. Or you've probably also heard, you really should engage your glutes in a back bend, right? You must never do shoulder stand during menstruation. Or inversions can help the symptoms of menstruation. So how do we know what to believe? This is where critical thinking steps in. In a nutshell, critical thinking is analyzing how we think with a view to improving it, so that we can think more logically, more reasonably, and without bias, or at least with less bias. Critical thinking is about using clarity, accuracy, precision, fairness, and good evidence. Critical thinking requires asking ourselves questions such as, what are my beliefs on a topic? What information am I using to come to my conclusion? What assumptions have led me to this conclusion? Does the evidence support my conclusion? And importantly, what evidence against my hypothesis or conclusion exists? That last question is a particularly important one. As humans, we tend to want to seek out information that confirms our beliefs. This is called confirmation bias, which is preferring to interpret, favor, or recall information that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. This approach can lead to more biased thinking and ultimately believing things that are not true. Critical thinking actually asks us to seek out evidence against our beliefs, against our hypotheses. Then we can come to a truer understanding of the nature of things. Another important element of critical thinking is evidence, as I mentioned. Evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. While most of us in an asana class are probably not thinking about evidence while flowing through sun salutations, many yoga teachers make claims that lack any real evidence regarding the physiological effects of yoga. These claims are also often shared on yoga teacher trainings, on wellness blogs, and even in published books on yoga. Consider the claim that shoulder stand, or sarvangasana, stimulates the thyroid gland, or the claim that twists cleanse the liver. Both of these claims, as it turns out, are based on speculation, they lack evidence, and do not have sound physiological reasoning behind them. Yet, because they are uttered so often, many yogis and yoga teachers begin to consider them fact. But common repetition of a claim is not evidence that the claim is valid. As philosopher academic Bertrand Russell wrote, the fact that an opinion has been widely held is no evidence whatever that it is not utterly absurd. Bertrand Russell also used the analogy of a teapot to illustrate that the burden of proof should lie upon the person making unfalsifiable claims rather than upon others to disprove the unfalsifiable claims. He wrote that if he were to assert, with no proof, that a teapot, too small to be seen by telescopes, orbits the sun in space between Earth and Mars, he could not expect anyone to believe him solely because his assertion could not be proven wrong. It is the same with claims made about yoga. Evidence is simply knowledge discovered through observation or experimentation. And the best conclusions are drawn from research that has been conducted in a systematic and rigorous way, or, in other words, a scientific way. It is one thing to claim that yoga cures cancer, for example. It is quite another to lead a thorough investigation into the effects of yoga on cancer and on people with cancer. Our book, The Physiology of Yoga, looks at popular claims about yoga, including the claim that yoga is good for cancer patients, and it provides the latest research to determine whether such claims are valid. An important tenet to the ethics of belief is what's known as Clifford's principle. In 1877, William Clifford wrote, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence." Quite a strong statement indeed. Let's look at how scientists rank evidence. Scientists use a hierarchy of evidence to help assess quality in research. At the top of the hierarchy pyramid are systematic reviews, meaning they're both the highest level of evidence and the least common. As you descend the pyramid, the amount of evidence increases, but so does the risk of bias, meaning that the chance of the information being biased is higher. So, a systematic review is a review of all the evidence on a clearly formulated question that uses systematic and explicit methods to identify, select, and critically appraise relevant primary research. Systematic reviews often, but not always, contain a meta-analysis of numerical data from the included studies. So in other words, they'll take the information from that study and do a new analysis of it. A systematic review should be reproducible and transparent. Next, the famous randomized controlled trial compares a randomized experimental group and a control group. These groups are followed up for the variables or outcomes of interest. That could be, for example, whether they engage in yoga. Control groups often take a placebo to give the analysis a comparison point. A cohort study is where one group receives an intervention of some kind and another group does not, and the two are compared. Case-controlled study is an observational study in which two existing groups differing in outcome are identified and compared on the basis of some supposed causal attribute. So for example, we look at smokers versus non-smokers. Which one develops lung cancer? Next, a case report is a detailed report of the symptoms, signs, diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up of one individual. Case reports may contain a demographic profile of the patient, but usually describe an unusual or new occurrence. A case series is a type of study that tracks multiple individuals with a known exposure, such as people who have received a similar treatment, or the researchers examine their medical records for exposure and outcome. Editorials, expert opinion, and background information at the bottom of the pyramid include articles in newspapers or other publications presenting the opinion of the author, or background texts including textbooks, which provide a broad overview of a topic with a selected review of the scientific literature. This pyramid has its limitations, of course. For example, it favors randomized controlled trials, which work well for some interventions like pharmaceuticals when a placebo pill can be used, but not so well for others, such as yoga, as a person cannot be blinded to the fact that they are doing yoga. And knowing that you are doing yoga will create certain expectations, which will then affect the final outcome. Nonetheless, this evidence pyramid offers a useful guide for assessing the quality of evidence. And it is a great starting point for you to begin to understand what constitutes the idea of evidence. So, in other words, evidence is not just repeating what we hear from other people and assuming it to be true. Finally, science is only one lens through which we might observe and describe the world. Poetry, for example, which I also love, uses a very different way of describing the world. Science is not necessarily better than poetry, of course, but if you are reading something that is trying to sound scientific, use scientific reasoning, or you yourself are making claims about something scientific, it is important to use critical thinking to analyze the evidence currently available to us. So start to ask questions about why you think what you think and what the evidence behind your claims is. When reading something purporting to be factual, it should cite references to the current body of scientific literature. I hope this has helped you to siphon through all of the different information sources out there so that you can make more educated evaluations of what is true and what is not. If you'd like to learn more about the latest evidence on how yoga affects the many systems of our body, from the musculoskeletal to the digestive and everything in between, be sure to check out our book, The Physiology of Yoga. Thank you very much for watching.